Caroline Crouch, a young British woman living in Greece, was murdered in her own home in May 2021. Her death shocked her family, friends, and the Greek community. Caroline was found dead in the family's home in Glyka Nera, an affluent suburb near Athens. The tragic event was initially reported as a robbery gone wrong, with Caroline's husband, Babis Anopoulos, claiming that intruders had broken into their house and killed his wife in front of their infant daughter. Babis told authorities that the intruders had tied him up and left the scene after the crime. However, something about his story did not add up. Law enforcement quickly began to investigate the circumstances surrounding the death. The initial reports did not fully convince the authorities, who began to scrutinize the details of Babis's account. Questions arose about the way the crime had occurred, and inconsistencies in Babis's statements prompted the police to dig deeper. Babis's behavior was also noted as suspicious by those who knew him. People described him as overly calm for someone who had just lost his wife in such a violent manner. There were no signs of forced entry into the home, and the police started to suspect that Babis might have been involved in the murder. As the investigation unfolded, the authorities began to gather evidence that indicated Babis's story might be fabricated. This marked the beginning of a long and tense investigation that would ultimately reveal the shocking truth behind Caroline's death. After Babis's story started to unravel, Greek authorities launched a full-scale investigation into the murder of Caroline Crouch. Police focused on finding evidence to support or contradict his claims of a home invasion. Investigators meticulously combed through the crime scene, collecting forensic evidence to piece together what had happened in the hours leading up to Caroline's death. One crucial piece of evidence was the lack of forced entry into the house. This finding raised suspicions about the possibility of an inside job. Investigators questioned Babis further about the sequence of events on the night of the murder, but his responses continued to raise doubts. While he initially seemed cooperative, his story started to fall apart under further questioning. In the weeks following the murder, police also found evidence that contradicted Babis's version of events. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras showed no signs of strangers entering the home around the time of Caroline's death. Instead, the footage revealed Babis walking outside the house late at night, raising even more questions about his involvement. Detectives also learned that Caroline and Babis's marriage had not been as perfect as it appeared on the surface. Neighbors and acquaintances described some tension in the relationship, and this sparked further investigation into the couple's personal life. Law enforcement looked into the couple's financial situation, searching for possible motives behind the crime. The investigation was becoming more complex as authorities began to suspect that Caroline's death was not the result of a random act of violence, but something much more sinister. As the investigation continued, Babis Anopoulos made several contradictory statements that only deepened the suspicion surrounding his involvement in his wife's death. In the days following Caroline's murder, he continued to maintain his innocence, claiming that intruders had killed her during a robbery gone wrong. However, his version of events began to change as investigators questioned him further. One of the key contradictions in his statements came when Babis was asked about the details of the so-called robbery. Initially, he claimed that the intruders had tied him up and left him unharmed, but later reports indicated that there was no physical evidence of him being restrained. The lack of physical signs of a struggle was unusual, especially considering the violent nature of the crime. This discrepancy raised questions about whether Babis had staged the scene to make it look like a robbery. Babis's emotional state also came under scrutiny. Those who spoke with him after Caroline's death described him as unusually calm for someone who had just lost a loved one in such a traumatic way. This behavior was noted by both friends and investigators, leading many to believe that Babis might be hiding something. As the contradictions in his statements mounted, police began to focus more on Babis as the prime suspect. They looked for any clues that might point to his involvement in the crime. Despite his efforts to maintain his innocence, the evidence against him was steadily building. The breakthrough in the investigation came when police discovered key pieces of evidence that directly contradicted Babis's account of events. Forensic experts discovered that Caroline's body had been moved after she was killed, which suggested that the crime scene had been tampered with. This finding was significant because it indicated that someone had staged the scene to make it appear as though a robbery had taken place. Additionally, investigators found that the phone belonging to Caroline had been used to make calls after her death, which was another inconsistency in Babis's story. He had told the police that the intruders had left with her phone, but the evidence showed otherwise. This discovery led investigators to believe that Babis may have been involved in the crime. The police also discovered that Caroline had been struggling in her marriage with Babis. She had confided in friends and family members about the difficulties in her relationship, particularly the controlling behavior exhibited by her husband. These revelations painted a picture of a man who may have been driven by jealousy and possessiveness, emotions that could have contributed to the tragic outcome. With this new evidence in hand, the police were able to move forward with their investigation, focusing on Babis as the primary suspect. It was becoming increasingly clear that the story he had told the authorities was not the truth. On June 17, 2021, Babis Anopoulos was officially arrested in connection with the murder of his wife, Caroline Crouch. After weeks of investigation, including forensic analysis, interviews with friends and family, and a detailed examination of Babis's behavior, the evidence against him became overwhelming. The police had uncovered that Babis had lied about crucial details of the night Caroline died. They learned that he had killed her during an argument, possibly in a fit of rage. The crime was not a robbery gone wrong, but rather the result of a deliberate act of violence by someone who had lost control. Babis's motive appeared to stem from his desire to maintain control over his wife and his frustration with her attempts to gain independence. Upon his arrest, Babis was charged with premeditated murder. The news of his arrest sent shockwaves through the community, as many had been shocked to learn that the man they once thought of as a grieving husband was actually the killer. Public reaction was divided, with some expressing sympathy for Caroline's family and others condemning Babis for his actions. The police also began to look more closely at Babis's financial situation and personal life, suspecting that these factors may have played a role in the murder. It was clear that the investigation was far from over, but Babis's arrest marked the beginning of the legal process that would eventually lead to his trial. As the investigation into the murder of Caroline Crouch continued, the police uncovered crucial details about Babis Anopoulos's possible motives. It became apparent that the couple's marriage had been strained for some time. Friends and family members of Caroline revealed that she had expressed concerns about her relationship with Babis, particularly his controlling behavior. One key factor that emerged during the investigation was Babis's financial troubles. It was revealed that Babis was heavily in debt and had been struggling to maintain his lifestyle. Investigators speculated that he may have felt threatened by Caroline's attempts to assert her independence, as she had begun to express her desire for a better life for herself and their daughter. Furthermore, Babis's obsession with controlling Caroline appeared to be a significant factor in the tragedy. Reports indicated that he had become increasingly possessive over the years, monitoring her every move and limiting her social interactions. Caroline had confided in friends about her fear of Babis's temper and his constant surveillance of her activities. These revelations suggested that Babis had become jealous and controlling, a dangerous combination that may have led to the fatal confrontation. The motive for the murder appeared to be rooted in Babis's desire to maintain control over Caroline and his fear of losing her. This understanding helped investigators piece together the timeline of events leading to her death. In October 2021, Babis Anopoulos stood trial for the murder of his wife, Caroline Crouch. The courtroom was filled with tension as prosecutors presented their case against him. The evidence was clear. Babis had killed Caroline in a fit of rage, and he had staged the crime scene to make it look like a robbery. The trial brought forward numerous details about the couple's troubled relationship. Witnesses testified about Babis's controlling behavior, his financial difficulties, and his attempts to isolate Caroline from her family and friends. The prosecution argued that Babis had murdered Caroline because he could not tolerate the idea of losing her. During the trial, Babis maintained his innocence, insisting that he had not intentionally killed his wife. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and many people in the courtroom found it hard to believe his version of events. As the trial progressed, it became clear that Babis had been motivated by jealousy, possessiveness, and a desire to control Caroline. The trial was closely followed by the media, and the case became a topic of public debate. Many people were shocked by the details that emerged, and the case raised important questions about the dangers of controlling relationships and the impact of financial pressure on individuals. Throughout the trial, Caroline's family remained steadfast in their support of her memory. Her parents, who had flown from the UK to Greece after her death, were deeply affected by the proceedings. They had lost their daughter in the most tragic way imaginable, and they were determined to see that justice was served. Caroline's parents spoke to the media about their daughter's life, her achievements, and the love she had for her daughter, Lydia. They expressed their grief over losing Caroline, but they also made it clear that they would fight for justice on her behalf. Caroline's mother, in particular, shared her sorrow, stating that she would raise Lydia to remember her mother's kindness and strength. Despite the heartbreak they were experiencing, Caroline's family remained focused on ensuring that Lydia grew up in a safe and loving environment. They vowed to provide her with the care and support she needed to grow up without her mother, and they took comfort in knowing that Caroline's legacy would live on through her daughter. As the trial continued, it became increasingly clear that Babis Anopoulos would be held accountable for his actions. His defense team struggled to present a convincing argument, and the prosecution's case appeared solid. With each passing day, the evidence stacked against him, and the reality of his situation became more apparent. Babis had once been a beloved husband and father, but the truth of his crime had shattered that image. The public and media turned against him, and his once positive reputation was destroyed. Caroline's family and friends could finally begin to move forward, knowing that justice was being served. While Babis was still entitled to a fair trial, many believed that his actions had already condemned him in the eyes of the public. The courtroom was tense as the trial neared its conclusion, and the final verdict was eagerly anticipated. After weeks of testimony and legal arguments, the court delivered its verdict in the case of Babis Anopoulos. He was found guilty of the premeditated murder of his wife, Caroline Crouch. The judge described the crime as an act of cold-blooded violence driven by jealousy and control. Babis's sentencing would come shortly after the trial, and it was clear that the consequences of his actions would be severe. The verdict was met with mixed reactions, but for Caroline's family, it brought a sense of justice, even though nothing could bring their daughter back. The case had brought to light the dangers of controlling relationships and the impact of jealousy and financial strain. Caroline's family continued to focus on raising her daughter, Lydia, in a way that honored Caroline's memory and provided her with the love and support she needed to thrive. Babis was now facing a lifetime behind bars for his crime. While his punishment could not undo the tragedy he had caused, it marked the end of a long and painful chapter for Caroline's family, who could finally begin the process of healing. Thanks for watching. If you loved this video, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss what's coming next. Trust me, you won't want to miss the surprises we have in store. Drop a comment below. Your thoughts could be featured in the next video. See you next time!